Welcome to Inbound Call Center Responses to COVID-19, a look into how call centers across the U.S. are shifting their business operations and strategies in response to the coronavirus pandemic. The last few weeks have seen a dramatic paradigm shift in both consumer behavior and contact center operations, given social distancing and shelter-in-place policies across the nation. These changes have added numerous challenges to an often already stressed system, and many call centers are seeking industry best practices on how to operate with optimal efficiency and an ideal consumer experience in this new reality. Joining us today are two people who've been at the front lines of this change: Art Scholler, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester, focusing on contact center applications and delivery, and Lance Hood, Senior Director of Inbound Authentication at Neustar. We are honored to have them both with us today. Art, let's start with you. What are you observing and hearing from inbound contact centers as they respond to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Jason, there's so much to cover here, but I really do want to speak to the audience and say you are doing amazing things. I've been in this industry over 30 years, and I think it's pretty consistent that none of us grew up wanting to be in customer service or contact centers. But what I find enormously consistent is that in people's DNA, we have this helping gene. And I am working with so many Forrester customers who are asking all these questions, who want to get help so that they can help their customers. And the movement of contact center agents, it's not hundreds of thousands of seats. It's literally millions. And so we're going to go into some details today in the midst of speaking to the best practices of what that movement looks like and how really to go about it the best way.
Thanks, Art. And one of the most important things here is the consumer, right? It's ultimately the callers that we're all seeking to serve, whether we're providing technology or we're actually delivering services by running a call center. What are you seeing as far as how consumers, the number of consumers, the call volumes, and the actual needs of consumers are shifting in response to the COVID-19 issues?
Mm-hmm. It's pretty amazing, and we hear many stories about, incredible spikes in volume upwards. But at the same time, in a number of industries, and what's going on in those industries is creating a drop in demand as well. So we kind of have to look at this across, and I'm not going to talk about every single vertical that's out there, but let's take travel and transportation, cruise lines, airlines, and let's include in that the hotel industry as well. An initial spike in volume because of cancellation of events and trips and questions about rebooking my cruise, for example. They've now kind of gone down a lot as those industries have really, because of social distancing requirements, dropped precipitously. So they have to deal with managing a workforce that they're going to have to lay some of them off. And how do they bring them back when they come back to business? Other industries that are seeing the increase in volume, such as retail banking, wealth management, when there's a spike in the stock market, either up or down. Now, wealth management tends to be more of a one-on-one relationship, but this is impacting retail banks with just large volumes while they have to move people and they have to deal with that. It's an interesting dynamic in healthcare. The insurance companies are actually seeing sort of standard or maybe even diminished volumes because we're not going to our regular doctors because of social distancing, even though in healthcare there's tons of questions about COVID-19, but the providers are being buried. The hospitals, the traffic, the questions that have to go into the providers is amazing. And the other industry that's just seeing dramatic spikes is state and local government. One contact center industry technology provider said that they've helped the state of New York scale up from what was 400 seats to 9,000. So it's the swings in volume, it's the unpredictability. And it is also the concerns in each of these industries that customers are expressing and need help with.
Well, first of all, I'm really sorry to hear about your cruise. So hopefully, for all of us, we'll get back to normal life and normal vacations again soon. I really appreciate your sort of comment of how this varies so much, by industry. But the vast majority of our customers at Neustar for our inbound authentication solution are in the financial services area, and even then, we're seeing, variations depending on the particular vertical within that category, and a lot of things kind of mixed up that are driving different levels of volume. We typically see a seasonal pattern of highest volume calls in the month of March, and then still a fairly high level of calls in April around the tax season. So one of the things we saw this month is in early March, we had that typical classic significant jump in volume, but as the stimulus package was revealed and it became clear the tax date was moving, that kind of really tapered off, and March went back to sort of a standard month. So my expectation is as we head into May and June, call centers will need to be prepared that seasonal volume is going to come back. It's not going to disappear. We also have seen a lot of volume with our broker and investment customers. As you mentioned, some of them seeing the highest volumes that they've seen since 2008. My expectation there is that, as you said, that is tied around the changes in the value of the stock market, and if those don't change profoundly going forward, that may be a one-time deal. But another thing I've heard anecdotally is more and more call volumes are around loans and changing loan payments. Have you seen anything around sort of that, which is really more of a consequence of the unemployment rate and kind of the consumer liquidity crisis?
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, take any place where any consumer has to pay any invoice or bill. So the mortgage industry, take even utilities, whether it's your water utility or electric utility. People have lost their jobs, and we want to keep the lights on, and we want to keep the water flowing so we can wash our hands. There is an incredible level of traffic around renegotiation of payment terms and what can be done. And part of what impacts this is as something rolls through Congress and it gets legislated and then all the Congress people go home, now someone has to actually implement, and the details have to be there. And if it has to flow through the financial services institutions and they don't have all the guidelines, it just creates a lot of confused traffic as well. But consumers and the unemployment levels that we are seeing is absolutely one source of customer concern and traffic.
So it does really put a burden on a number of different organizations in this new environment. Just as an example, a customer calling to renegotiate a loan payment is a lot more complex transaction than calling in to check on a payment status or an account balance. How overall do you see call centers adjusting right now? What are the impacts that this is having on them and their ability to actually supply call center services to this, changing volume and distribution of callers?
Sure. So it really is two things that are going on, which are part and parcel to what a contact center does. It is the customer requests on one side of the coin, and it is the resource that's needed to address those requests. So we've just talked about all these wild swings in traffic volumes, both up and down, and new sets of questions as well. So the customer demand on one side has become all this sort of wide swings that are out there, but the workforce has to change as well. And they got to go home. And as I said earlier, people are moving not hundreds of thousands of seats, but, literally millions of seats of contact center agents to the home. That means that scheduling really gets tossed out the window. Well, not really tossed out the window. It puts incredible pressure on workforce managers. They are needing to become more agile. They're needing to provide more flexible schedules because that workforce that's home is now home with their spouse who works from home, the kids who are now home, and they can't take calls during this usual shift that they used to. So matching all of this is just causing workforce managers to have what I call usually the intraday firefight. There's that one day where we had a spike in traffic. It's almost like it's every day now, and that there's new questions from customers. So establishing new skills and ensuring that agents are trained, and new changes to call routing, because now this loan renegotiation intent is maybe a new thing, and that we need people trained on the special terms and conditions based on government legislation. So it's just both sides of the equation. The customer requests and the workforce are both moving targets, and that everyone really has to scramble to be able to balance that as they watch their service levels on their wall boards all go red.
Yeah, I would say that I've been really impressed with how efficiently so many of these organizations have, in fact, moved so many of those seats. I've been on the phone with several different call center agents as well, all of them working from home, probably as many of us are right now. And it's been really impressive to see that happen. Some of the other factors that I think one of the other factors that affected some of our customers is they had made significant investments in offshoring their call centers, and some of them, particularly those that had offshore centers in either the Philippines or in India, have really taken it hard because they've lost a significant portion of their capacity. At the same time, they're trying to move these agents to work from home. Do you have any suggestions for organizations that have taken, let's say, a 20% hit in just their total capacity while they're trying to deal with this?
Sure. So as we look at customer demand and we look at the unpredictability or this impairment of the workforce, now that's actually a wrong word. Agents are not impaired. It's just their ability to work. You then have to look at all the other tools that we've been using for years and how much more can you squeeze out of those tools. One is really proactive notifications to your customer base saying, hey, make sure that you make use of the self-service tools that are available, the website, the mobile app, et cetera, or if you want to contact us, use a digital channel where we have a little more latitude in terms of how we staff to respond to that. We've been using those tools and those strategies all along, but now you have to really kick them in. But that proactive notification, I've seen it personally with my banks and credit cards that I deal with, that if you try to call us, it's going to take us a while to answer your call. So please make use of these alternate methods of communicating to really kind of mitigate that service level problem. But as far as, yes, our seats are over in other geographies, well, you know, if you were solely sourced from those geographies, that's a real problem. But if you're multi-sourced, that you're able to shift traffic from location A to location B, it might be location B is in a less impacted geography, and that you have to try to staff up rapidly in that alternate geography. This is business continuity at a level that a lot of people had not really anticipated in their business continuity plans.
Yeah, I think you're totally right, and it's kind of like all technologies on deck right now, and really looking at how to use those technologies, those channels, and to get to the highest levels of self-service. Let's talk a little bit about the agents and how they're impacted. We sometimes focus a lot on the customer experience. We've talked a little bit about the operational approaches call centers can take, but ultimately the people who are on the front lines of addressing these challenges are the agents. How are they being impacted in their lives beyond, they're now at home? How have all of these changes impacted their experience, and how should organizations be thinking about best supporting their agents in these new environments?
Sure. So let's break this into two populations. There's still some organizations that the agents haven't gone home yet, or at least not all of them. So how does the agent get impacted in an existing contact center? How do you social distance in an existing office space? I mean, believe it or not, I have talked to some clients that they're still in some locations where they can have the existing operations stay in place. You need to communicate and address their fears. I now, and some agents who may be taking public transportation to work, once they get to work, are they safe there at work? And so there's a lot of communications by management about the strategies and tactics to not only social distance, but also sanitize the building, the seats. Don't reuse headsets, okay? Just period, end of story. Do not do that. And so the agents who are still in place, there's a lot of care for that workforce that needs to be done, because some of them, even though they may need the job and may need the paycheck, they have a sufficient enough fear that they just do not want to come in. Now, let's take the workforce that's gone home. For some agents, this is just going home. And I literally had an inquiry myself personally 2 weeks ago with my insurance company for healthcare. And we went through the whole claim and the questions on the claim and so on and so on. I just thought at the end of the call, where are you working from? She said, from home. Just like that. Hear the tone of voice that I used. They were used to it. They had work from home in place. They had the technology and the tools in place. They had the personnel procedures. So it's like, hey, I'm just working from home. Now, that said, we have the unusual, unprecedented environment where a lot more of the agents are going home. These are not prepared work at home spaces. The rest of the family is home. The kids are home. The other adult members of the family are home. And that environment can be a bit disruptive. But you know what? I think that customers understand, and that there's a level of empathy that customers are showing to the agent. Now, this is very qualitative on my part, but if they hear the barking dog or they hear the child coming up saying dad or mommy, they get it, because we're all working from home. So this impact on the agents to work from home now, there's the entire psychological element of the impact of the pandemic that's affecting all of us. But these agents can still work, and they can still do their job, and they can still help their customers. And so they work through the tools, they work through the impairments, they do work through that a bit more impaired home environment. And yes, we can still quality assure and monitor calls and coach agents. The big thing is to make sure that our supervisors are checking in with those home agents. That's the best practice in work at home anyway, but the communication has to be ratcheted up because of this crazy environment.
And my next question kind of leverages off of that. These are all the things that are done to help agents be more effective and to keep their morale up. Yet at the same time, unfortunately, for a number of industries, criminals tend to exploit these times as well. And in particular, exploiting the stress levels and challenges that agents are facing in these new environments where they may not have as much supervision, or they're working in a different environment all on their own, really many of them for the first time. How should call centers be looking at the threat from these criminals and trying to take over attacks in this new environment?
You know, if there's one thing that out of big crises, there's winners, there's losers, there's the profiteers. And in this case, absolutely the scammers are going to do everything they can to take advantage of it. And so any way possible, they can burrow their way into the queue and come through with a false identity, or maybe try to socially engineer personally identifiable information out of the agent to then go market it somewhere else. They're going to do it. So, and you're right to articulate the fact that in a stressful environment, the agents and their own radar that we depend upon for them to hear the possibility that they are being socially engineered to divulge information may not be as tuned up. So I think that this is like any other crisis where there's going to be the scammers and the profiteers. And I'm hearing some evidence of that. Certainly, I'm talking to people about their entire operations, but in those industries where personally identifiable information, where financial data and information and even the financial assets themselves can be at risk, there's the potential.
Yeah, and I think when you think about a common fraudster technique, they try to add stress to agents, right? And you mentioned the helping gene early on. That's really the gene they're seeking to exploit, and by putting agents under stress, trying to get them to be a little bit too helpful and to forego some of the, compliance processes for really identifying a new caller. And we certainly see that now that stress level is just pre-built into the whole system, and that really makes it easier, I think, for these fraudsters who are really skilled in this social engineering process. Just to put a little plug in for what we do in our solution is provide a trust level, a pre-answer authentication process that really helps agents know they've got a trustworthy caller on the line so they can get right to help and are less vulnerable to those kind of account takeover attacks. And similarly, identifying potentially risky callers in advance. And, one of the operational treatments of that may be to make sure that if you have less experienced agents, you're not sending them those risky callers, but rather send your high-trust callers to your potentially newer agents and route the more risky callers to a more experienced agent as a potential call treatment.
Absolutely.
So what else? This is kind of the new normal. We don't know how long this new normal is going to last. I think we're all hopeful it ends in a month or two. It could be longer. We could be back into a similar operating mode next year. We're in a world of a great deal of uncertainty about the coronavirus. What are the other suggestions as we look to kind of create ongoing processes for this kind of a situation that call centers should be thinking about?
Sure. I think we need to put the phrase new normal in the context of time frames. I think that right now we're in the big scramble, all right? There's still so many moving parts that people are going through as of this week, and I'm not sure if we're to the new normal yet. The new normal for me would be we are still not out of the work from home. We are still not in a fully recovered economy where we're kind of back to business as usual. So to me, the new normal is still this uncertain environment. And so let me talk to that, because I also want to talk to beyond the new normal. The new normal is the being, and this word gets overused, being incredibly agile. And I go back to our workforce managers that have to balance the traffic with the agent resource to take care of the traffic, and the agility that they are going to get stressed and that they're going to start to show their ability to really be perhaps more agile than they've been in the past. That's part of the new normal. Another part of the new normal is that as we, and I hate to use the word force, because customers will want service on their channel of choice, period. I always say to companies, even though you want to deflect calls to cheaper channels, good luck when you try and force customers there. But this environment is one where we are ending up, because of all the issues, moving customers to more and more of the digital channels, to web chat, to messaging, boosting some of our self-service capabilities, the chatbots, even more than we have in the past. So part of this new normal is more adoption by our customers of the digital and self-service channels. I see that that's what we're going to get out of this. And now let's talk about beyond the new normal, when maybe we can go back to our contact centers and all that sort of stuff. These things, what we learn, and I don't want to be Pollyannish here, trust me, but what we learn about being more agile and what we learn about boosting our digital channel and self-service channel capabilities are things that should take hold when we kind of hopefully get back to business almost as usual, although I think that we're never going to go back.
I read constantly about how in our personal lives and in the business experience in different ways, we're being pushed into doing things in new ways. Are there one or two things you think that through all of these processes that'll really stick? You mentioned self-service, for example. Any others that will probably become a much more core part of how call centers operate as a result of going through this experience?
Yeah. Well, there's kind of three things that come to mind. One is truly this adoption of work from home at more of an industrial scale. Now, some companies have already done that quite a bit, but there's others that haven't. And for some reasons, maybe more of a cultural bias against it. But now many companies are just simply being forced. And they'll learn. And they'll learn that, hey, it's not that bad. In fact, it's good. The agility on workforce managers, I do believe that's going to take hold, and maybe they can get back to some more regular scheduling, but being able to factor that in and muscle their way through that. And I mentioned earlier, as you've also said as well, the adoption of digital channels. But your mention earlier about fraud, being more flexible and more alert and being able to apply the right tools to prevent fraud is really one of the things that I think more organizations are going to absorb.
Well, on that note, let me spend a few minutes talking a little bit about the services and the technology that Neustar delivers, and it really is focused on this balance between, preventing fraud and protecting accounts, delivering a better experience when there is a call, both for the callers as well as the agents, and finally being more efficient as well. So we provide at Neustar a Preanswer caller authentication solution, and there are a number of different elements to that. In the basic structure of this process is that before a call is answered, we inspect that call within the global telephone network. We actually operate as a phone company. And what we can do is assure that the claimed phone number for that call connecting into the call center is actually coming from the phone that's associated with that number, and that further it's actually in a call with the call center. That's basically what we do, and it turns out to be an incredibly accurate way of identifying callers. It actually used to be the way many years ago that most authentication and identification was done in call centers. Unfortunately, during the early 2000s, the phone system and the global and the internet were connected, and it allowed for spoofing and other nefarious activities, which have been attempted to mitigate through the knowledge-based authentication process that we just discussed. But there are a number of, by being able to authenticate and identify a caller before their call is answered, it really puts in place the ability to create different flows or routes for these callers. And highly trusted callers can be given an experience with literally just ask them their name. And when we think about how simple that can be, particularly in these times, it's very powerful, and it's a better experience for the customer. And it turns out to be still, by verifying their phone and their phone number and their phone call and their name or another simple piece of information, that lets agents very quickly start to support callers. And that's really important in these times. So it's been very gratifying and rewarding, I think, for us as a company to see our customers in these really challenging times be able to rely on our technology to keep handle times down, to keep average call times down, and to keep agents focused on, as you said, they're leveraging their helping gene instead of their interrogation gene. And I think it's fair to say most call center agents want to help. They didn't go into this business in order to interrogate people. So we see a lot of benefits to that. Our customers are seeing benefits to that, and it's been really grateful for us to see that technology used. But I think, there's no better time than the present to start thinking about how others can use this kind of technology to streamline their operations, better identify callers, and better identify legitimate callers, and better identify risky callers. And so That's really what we have been doing as a company, and our customers have been benefiting from it. And if there's anyone out there listening that would, certainly like to employ this kind of technology, we're more than happy to follow up and help with that. So a few closing thoughts. I'll throw a few out here. You've hit on a lot of these already, Art, during the discussion, but clearly in these times, flexibility is key. Being able to adapt, we still don't know what's around the corner. And I think thinking short term is important, and you've listed a lot of great operational processes. Think long term as well. Learn from this experience. Invest in the kind of technologies that can increase self-service. Simple authentication keeps people in the IVR channel, for example. And, track your metrics and make sure you're on track with those. And I think learn from your peers. And, Art, your comments here today hopefully have been really helpful to our listeners. Any final comments you'd like to make?
This is maybe going a little far afield, but we're in the midst of an environment right now that elicits fear. And in the midst of fear, we end up going down the path of fight or flight. And so speaking to that, for your agent workforce, for your management workforce, your supervisors, your QA teams, your workforce managers, and your contact center leaders as well, this opportunity for contact center leaders to lead their teams through this, it can be a challenge. And so to focus on the wellness elements, is it meditation? Is it just communication? Is it the water cooler? One thing we're doing at Forrester, a number of our teams have just literally a quick 15, 20-minute water cooler conversation a couple times a week. This is really a time to help the workforce through the stressful part of this, so they can help the customers who are being stressed. And what we've talked about today is so many different ways to take a look at this and how to work through it and so on and so on. But, when it comes to customer service, it ultimately, it's delivered by a chatbot when we automate, but when it escalates to an agent, it is an opportunity for the brand to shine. And that brand, performance happens through those agents. So take care of them.
Great. Well,
thank you. We'll wrap up today's conversation. Our thanks both to Art Scholler and Lance Hood for sharing their insights and expertise. If you have questions or would like to review any of the issues we discussed today further, please feel free to reach out to us by emailing risk@team.neustar. You can also find more information on the Neustar inbound authentication solutions at inbound.neustar. Thank you for joining us today. Best of luck, and please stay safe out there. Thanks.